you may proceed.
Okay, thank you. So let me start by saying thank you for the opportunity to spend time with you. Again, something that we can do in a virtual world that would be more challenging in a face-to-face world where travel takes time and days. So I do appreciate this opportunity, and let me start by saying thank you. Thank you for giving me the opportunity and work in this capacity. This is your program, and it's a program of the PCUSA. Specifically, we fall under PMA, and through your generosity, this program is possible, and I have the opportunity to respond to what I feel is a call in my heart to this kind of ministry. So thank you for supporting this and making this possible and working in partnership. So this is the core staff of PDA. About half of us are based out of Louisville, and about half are deployed staff. We have staff in Arkansas, Maryland, California, other places in Kentucky, and then of course about half of us are in Louisville. And then what I can do, Larry, is I can, in addition to the recording, I can convert this into a PDF. It's too large as a PowerPoint, but I can convert it into a PDF if people would like to have that presentation as well. And so here's our mission. You can find this on our website. And we're all about witnessing to the healing love of Christ and helping congregations and mission partners of the PCUSA to do the same. Officially, we're the Emergency and Relief Program of the PCUSA, and our core funding comes from the One Great Hour of Sharing. So let me put in a plug for the One Great Hour of Sharing and say thank you for the ways that you've promoted it in your Presbyterian, your congregations. And please do it this Lenten season, as the disasters are ever increasing in number and magnitude, and the resources are greatly needed. So you probably have heard a little bit about Matthew 25, and that being a new focus, or not a new focus, but a renewed focus of the denomination, coming out of both the 222nd and 223rd General Assemblies. The three main foci are eradicating poverty, ending systemic racism, and congregational vitality. And it's including more now as it's kind of developing and evolving as it goes through the PMAB and other entities, to also addressing climate change, militarism, and other expressions of oppression. And PDA, as all of the programs, are aligning ourselves with those foci, and are certainly considering those when we do our work. What are the ways that poverty presents itself in disaster preparedness and response, as well as racism and congregational vitality? So we are aligning ourselves more with that. And truth be told, we all have been doing this work forever. I mean, certainly our work is reflected in the words of Matthew 25, and I think this is just giving it more substance within Presbyterian Mission Agency. So the best way for you to become familiar with PDA is go to our website. We do work hard to keep it real-time, up-to-date, and informative. And so you can see the address. So everything from here on out is really on our webpage. So if you want to go back and reference something, pcusa.org/PDA, and this is what you'll see. And I'm going to go specifically to the active response part of the banner. And if you pull that menu down, these are our core functions. We respond to natural disasters, international disasters, refugee ministry, story production, and then we have some specialized work that we do. So let me start with refugee ministry. I didn't know this until I started volunteering with PDA in the mid-90s. But the program that now is PDA was first known as Presbyterian World Service, and it really came into existence to respond to the refugee crisis in the years after World War II. As we all know, just the numbers of refugees around the world was enormous, and PDA Church World Service would be another example of an organization that came into being after that, and many other organizations came into being in response to that crisis. So our roots go back to refugee ministry. And here's some of the support that our refugee program offers to mid-councils, folks such as you. We offer basic information, referrals, education, events, and resources. And included in those resources is a lot of liturgical resources, Bible studies, liturgy, hymns, that can be used during the course of the year. Accompaniment and technical support, connecting concerns to public policy, advocacy is a part of what we do, and then grants to help local mid-councils partners speak into refugee ministry. And there's a lot more available at the website. As you can imagine, what we're most focused on now with the refugee ministry is the Afghan Evacuee Resettlement program. And I suspect that you all have heard a bit about that, where they're anticipating perhaps in excess of 100,000 Afghan evacuees to look to resettle in the United States, because Afghan is no longer a place where they can stay safely. And because of their ties to supporting the US for the last 20 years, as we've been in Afghanistan, they now are coming here to seek safety and a new life. And so we're quite engaged in that. The way we're engaged in that, when we get calls from mid-councils, from congregations, what we're trying to do, we as an entity, as an organization, PDA, we're not looking to develop the infrastructure to resettle people, nor are we looking to directly resettle people, but rather we're connecting those interested with the over 270 local refugee resettlement offices that are located around the United States. And most of those local offices will receive Afghan evacuees, refugees to resettle. And you can see they are distributed, and just about every one of those offices will get some evacuees, refugees. And I did blow up, I saw you looking closely at the screen. I'm not sure if that's why, but I did take your part of the world and blew it up. And you see that you have a local refugee office in Utica. And I don't know the specific name of it. They don't generally go by the name local refugee office, but they typically, like in Louisville, it's Kentucky Refugee Ministries. So I can get that information for you if you're interested.
I can provide it for you.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
I happen to be on the board.
Cool.
It's the center, which is the former Mohawk Valley Resource Center for Refugees. And as you note, it is an LIRS affiliate. To date, in the last, since the end of last year, we've resettled about 100 Afghan, what were called asylees, and probably another 50 to 100 anticipated in the first quarter of this year.
Oh, Mark, that's amazing. How fortuitous to have you on the call.
And you may be aware that Utica has one of the highest per capita populations of refugees in the nation. The UNHCR has called it the town that loves refugees.
I like that. I hope that you share that proudly and broadly.
Every chance I get.
Yeah, and thank you for mentioning LIRS. That stands for Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services.
Yes.
And for the Jason, you, Larry, Kevin may already know this, but there are 9 national organizations that are in partnership with the State Department to resettle refugees. And one of them is a Lutheran organization, which Mark just alluded to. The one that we work most closely with is Church World Service. And I don't know, Mark, if you remember what color square they are, but I forget who belonged to all the different colors.
Well, the nearest one would be in Syracuse. Unfortunately, the State Department no longer allows local refugee centers to be duly affiliated. I had suggested at one time that Utica consider that.
Oh, okay.
But it's currently not a possibility.
Yeah, so a little bit of the landscape, because of the way the partnership works with the State Department, is that these 9 organizations are reimbursed based on a formula, which is based on the number of people they're asked to resettle. So as you can imagine, the previous administration, the number of refugees coming into the country was down to about, I think the last year of the Trump administration, it was maybe 12,000. And so what happens is that the offices scale up and scale down depending on what that number is. So over the course of the Trump administration, they staffed down incredibly significantly. And now you're going from 12,000 to 100,000 in less than a year. And it's hard for these local offices to staff up to meet that need. So what we're finding, Mark, is that the local refugee offices are overwhelmed, and they're also looking to forge partnerships with community organizations that may not have typically been involved in refugee resettlement. So Larry, if you have congregations or you as a presbytery are looking to support that office, you have the connection with Mark. And Mark, unless I'm mistaken, you all probably can use some additional support.
I think so, although the Refugee Center in Utica is one of the more robust centers in the nation. Also, we're fortunate to be in New York, where during the Trump administration, the state of New York provided funding to its refugee centers to keep them open. The reality of 4 years of the Trump administration is not only some centers staffed down, but many centers were shuttered. And so across the nation, there are significant gaps in the ability to do refugee resettlement.
Yeah, cool. I'm glad that we made this connection. Thank you, Mark. Mark, do you know Susan Crable?
I do not.
She might be somebody you'd want to have a conversation with. She's the PDA staff person for Refugee and Asylum. And you can get her contact information off the webpage, or if you want to, I can put it in the chat box in a little bit.
I'd be happy to have a conversation with her.
Thanks. So here's something that we did, an example of the partnership we had. And this is a partnership between a Presbyterian church and a PCUSA Camps and Conference Center. So with Shenandoah Presbytery, FBC Winchester, Massanutten Springs working together, the camp became the temporary shelter site for the evacuees as they arrived in the United States. And then First Pres Winchester, working with their local refugee office, were the ones who were instrumental in identifying the support, the lodging, those sorts of things, so that they could temporarily stay at the camp and then be more permanently resettled in the community. And PDA's portion of that was to supply a grant and some expertise through Susan. But to date, and this is a little bit dated already, 12 men have been welcomed. They're expecting families, and that's ongoing, because as you mentioned, Mark, not only have a number of people already arrived at that local office, but more to come. So that's an example of what we've done. We also have a story ministry part of our program, and this is a sampling of the documentaries that we currently have. Most of them are available at this website, or they all give directions on how to acquire them. They cover things like gun violence, recovery from the tsunami, detention centers that are detaining immigrants and asylum seekers. Flint is the newest one, and that's the poisoning of an American city, Flint, Michigan. And they all have study guides, and they all have materials to help communities do screenings. So more than just kind of showing a movie to a congregation and saying, yeah, take it and process it, but ways to do a screening where there can be experts on hand and make it into a community event. So if you're looking for any kinds of activities along these lines, educational experiences, I encourage you to share this information through the Presbyterian, the congregations. We do have international ministry. And internationally, we work more collaboratively. So we've made the philosophical, theological decision that when a country was hit with a disaster, we're not going to start another nonprofit with people from outside the area to do the work. But what we're constantly doing is developing partnerships. We work closely with our mission co-workers who already know many of the partners. And then if an area gets hit by a disaster, we leverage those relationships to help that organization that is already on the ground, already doing good work, already trusted and credible, to build their capacity and capability. And you can see in dark blue, you can see some of the specific countries where we have active projects. And I'll highlight 3 of them. One is Haiti. So I don't think this will surprise you to know that that it's been, what, August, 4 or 5 months since the earthquake, but they are still very much in emergency mode. They're still supplying basic life supplies to people at this point. So we have 2 partners in Haiti, one Vendama and the other ADLH. And with these 2 organizations, we're providing funding so that they continue to provide water, food, first aid kits, blankets, hygiene kits, trampolines. We are working with our mission co-workers in the area, and we do have a consultant on the ground, David Gerville, and they're already continuing to develop both medium and long-term plans for the recovery in Haiti, which, you know, they're still recovering from the previous earthquake, still recovering from COVID, still recovering from hurricanes, still recovering from the political instability. So there's a lot of work there to do. Another one is the ongoing humanitarian crisis in South Sudan. So there were approximately 96,000 people displaced in the southern part of southern Sudan because of heavy floods. And then in addition to the COVID, and PDA is providing grants to provide mosquito nets, sleeping mats, plastic sheets for making shelters, rubber ropes, blankets, emergency or energy saving stoves to help support the humanitarian crisis in South Sudan. So Haiti and Sudan would be more examples of what we're still doing in that emergency phase. Here's one that's pretty cool. This is in the Middle East, and this is through a partnership with the Middle East Council of Churches. And this is a women's livelihood project where through the partnership and funding provided to the Middle East Council of Churches, they're providing skill training, not only to help women cope with the disasters that are happening in the area, but also give them a livelihood, a means of livelihood. And so 40 vulnerable Syrian and Iraqi refugee women, in addition to vulnerable women from the Jordanian host community, are being trained in vocational training to help them do things like crochet products that are used on special occasions, gifts, decorations, and so forth, and then setting up a Facebook page and then an exhibition to provide the opportunity to sell the projects to help raise incomes for the trainees. So this is something that is a little bit more future-oriented in sustaining and building resilience. And then our domestic, which is what most people know about PDA. So domestically, we work primarily through volunteers. And you can see the states and territories where we have active projects, and this is even outdated. We need to add other places like Virginia. I mentioned the refugee project there and other areas. But we do leverage volunteers in significant ways in our domestic ministry. We have a national response team that's made up of about 80 people, and they're all volunteers, divided about 60% non-clergy, 40% clergy, retired, some still working. And they respond to disasters, both human caused and natural. As I mentioned, about 80 volunteers throughout the country. Training and experience in disaster response. Deploy always in collaboration with presbyteries and at the invitation of presbyteries, mid-councils. We took a hiatus from in-person deployments, March of 2020, but in July of last year, we did start doing in-person deployments on a case-by-case basis. And they're there to help the presbytery assess the damage, and also both within the Presbyterian community and the communities that have been impacted, and then help the presbytery coordinate both a short-term plan, mid-term plan, and a long-term plan. Where we have a more significant footprint is in the long-term recovery. We have volunteer host sites. Before COVID, we had about 40 of them. We shut that down in March of 2020. And then July 1, 21, we opened 6 sites: Texas, North Carolina, California, and Nebraska. And we're looking to open up one in Kentucky in response to the tornadoes, and probably one in South Louisiana for Ida. I mentioned earlier, pivot and adapt have become part of our vocabulary as well. And we did develop things specifically in response to COVID that could be done virtually. So we did do virtual deployments where we worked with mid-councils, and we did a ton of resilience webinars. And I know, Larry, that you've had some interaction with Kathy Riley. That's a picture of her. And I think you may have done one of those resilience webinars in the Presbytery of Utica.
One of our sessions took advantage of that.
Oh, okay. Well, I always see those as webinars that are done point in time, meaning that it's not one and done, because situations change, and even the webinars have evolved in terms of presentation style and content. So if you ever wanted to do something for faith leaders, and I use that in the most inclusive way, though, those can always be scheduled through Kathy. And if you had 12 of them in the past, you can still do 12 more. And we are starting to consider in-person deployments for those to do in-person workshops as well. And we also have a renewed focus on encouraging what we're calling commuter volunteers or local volunteers, because what we found with COVID is that, as we all found out, people were not volunteering and going to places like they once did. And so having that spirit of volunteerism locally, I tell people that as a youth minister, it was easier for me to say to a group of kids, let's drive for 16 hours in a van and go to West Virginia to volunteer. That was easier than saying, let's get in a car and go across town to volunteer. Yeah, it's just something about out there. And I think it's true with adults as well. But there's plenty of volunteer opportunities. Well, like we talked about, Mark, just with the refugee ministry, there's plenty of opportunities to volunteer right around the corner. So we have a renewed focus on that. We do grants. We have a church damage grant that we do provide to congregations that have been impacted by. We do have initial assistance grants that are made available to presbyteries to help presbyteries get engaged in the immediate response, which is typically tarps, temporary housing, gift cards, gas cards, those sorts of things. And we have seed grants that support the development of host sites, and special project grants that help with the long-term recovery. And these grants, the special project grants, those are dependent on the generosity of Presbyterians to a specific disaster. So I can't remember if you had much impact, for instance, from Superstorm Sandy, but there was a fairly generous response to Superstorm Sandy. So we were active with special project grants in Connecticut. I know in some places in New York, certainly in the metropolitan area, New York City, New Jersey, and other places. And assuming you promoted the appeal to the tornadoes in December, we had a very generous response to that, and we'll be able to be very engaged in the long-term recovery. Speaking of the tornadoes, everything that PDA does, we've done with the tornadoes that impacted multiple states. We did deploy an in-person team. We did award a church damage grant. First Pres Mayfield was destroyed, Kentucky. We did award initial assistance grants to several presbyteries. We did an appeal so that we do anticipate additional deployments and additional grants. And we even embedded several of our volunteers with the Red Cross at their shelters primarily to provide disaster spiritual care. Not forgetting the Presbytery of Utica. I looked and recently, the last couple of years, we did respond to a flooding disaster in your presbytery. We deployed a team, and we also awarded an initial assistance grant. I know we talked about a special project grant, but I didn't see a record of that ever being requested. And then last year, we provided pastoral support to one of your faith leaders, both virtually and with a pastoral support grant. So you have been touched by the ministry of PDA. These are the most recent numbers that we've consolidated. So you can see that we generally award around $6 million, in this case, $6.5 million across the United States and 56 countries. You can see that over half of that was for COVID. We did, even during a COVID year, we did a lot of virtual stuff with 210 of our team members. I know I said there's only 80, so some of them were deployed multiple times. And we did touch about a third of our presbyteries. And then we also have a program where we work with the Presbyterian women to train disaster preparedness trainers. I mentioned Flint. Flint is available through Amazon Prime and over 1 million streams. And we developed congregational resources. And through those resilience webinars that I mentioned, we provided those webinars. There were 55 of them, and they included over 700 people. And thank you again for supporting the One Great Hour of Sharing and Special Appeals. That's how we're able to do this ministry. Again, it's not my ministry. It's not our ministry. Well, it is our ministry, but it's not my ministry. It's a ministry of the PCUSA. And since you were a part of the PCUSA, this is your ministry. So this is what you've done in the last year or so. So thank you. I do say we often hear, especially during COVID times, you know, we see the Baptists show up with their chainsaws and we see the Salvation Army show up with their food trucks. Where are the Presbyterians? Why are there just 2 of you? Because that's typically how we deploy a team. But I can say this in all sincerity, wherever there is a Presbyterian engaged on the ground, that's PDA. And I suspect that there's been a lot of events, both ones that I know about and ones that I don't, where you as faith leaders, you and your congregations have been involved. You have been working at the food pantries. You have been helping people muck out. You have been making donations. So PDA is alive and well, working throughout the denomination. So thank you. And that is what I have to share, Larry. I didn't time myself. I'm not sure how far over, a little bit over the 20 minutes, perhaps.
Well, you had a lot of ground to cover there. So.
We stay busy. We stay busy.
Yeah.
So if there is time, I know you generally only meet for half an hour, but
Yeah.
we'd be more than happy to stick around if there's any questions.
Jason, you had a question in the chat box.
Right. It was back when when you were talking about the various screenings and hosting a screening and not just a viewing. But I was curious if there were ways in which you were hearing of congregations creatively hosting a screening when they might not be gathering together as much in person to do so.
Well, they've definitely been very creative when we could do in person. There's actually, I think one of the videos that's on that list is how they did it in Dayton, Ohio, and how they partnered with, I think a local museum is who they actually partnered with, and they really got a broad reach to do what they wanted to do. We have a person, Miles Markham, and Miles works most closely with the screenings and with the story ministry. And so you could reach out to him, miles.markham, miles.markham @pcusa.org. And Jason, he could give you some ideas of what they've done, because I know they've done screenings during even during COVID.
I think his name was in the PowerPoint you did, so it'll be in the PDF that you sent to us.
Yeah, actually, you were absolutely right. Because in this, I can cover 2 things with this. I should just start at the beginning, shouldn't I have? Yeah, how to host a screening. Jason, if you see that, that talks about what they did. That was in person, so that doesn't directly answer your question, but that shows what one community did. And then, yeah, you can see Susan Crable is the 3rd one from the top, and Mark, it's susan.crable@pcusa.org. Actually, I should do that when I refine this. I should put email addresses. And then you see Miles Markham is actually the last one, and it's miles.markham@pcusa.org.
Thank you, Jim.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Hello, Rose. Welcome. Welcome to the call. I'm not sure how much you were on it, but welcome.
It's great to join you all. Every week I look up and it somehow slips past the time, but I'm grateful to always be invited. And I think one of the largest groupings of permanent funds that we administer is it benefits Presbyterian disaster assistance. So it made sense for me to connect with you here, but looking for a window to come up to Utica Presbyterian and visit with you all in person. So hoping that that can happen soon. It was good to see you, Jim.
Good
Thank
to see
you for all the
Rose.
great work.
And whenever we put together the budget and we see investments earned on endowments that we can use for disaster ministry, we sing your praises. We sing your praises. So so thank you for managing that.
We're grateful.
Jim, thank you again for your time. Thank you. You've been a really good friend to the Presbytery of Utica, and we really appreciate your ministry. So.
Well, and again, I mean, in all sincerity, this is something we do together.
Yeah.
So Presbyterians do that well. We're a connectional church, and I think this is a beautiful example of how the connectional work of the church really makes a difference in people's lives. So thank you for all you're doing, Mark. I'll be interested in hearing from Susan if you guys are able to connect and whether we can, because like you saw, we do offer grants, refugee grants, as well as other things. So yeah, cool. Well, take care, everybody, and good to be with you. And if you ever want to invite me back, Mark, to dive more deeply into any one of those, I'm sorry, Larry meant to say, or Mark, if you want me to dive deeper into any of those specific programs, I can do that as well.
Excellent. Thank you. All right, friends, the Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Bye now.
God bless.